Okay, so we're in standard form. We've determined that we have to use the bubble method on this problem. So let's do the bubble method. What signs are we going to be using? We need a positive and a negative. How do we know that we need different signs? The constant is negative. Thank you, Danielle. If the constant is negative, that means we have to multiply to get a negative. Only different signs will multiply to a negative. We can't have the same sign. What is it that we are looking for when we make our bubbles? May? A positive 13. Okay. My only option for my first bubble. 1 and 3. I have a few options for my second bubble. What are they? 1 and 56. Let's go to our sticks. Jalen, what's another option for my second bubble? 2 and 28. Kion, what's another option for my second bubble?
Yeah, second bubble.
Mm-hmm. We got 2 and 28. 4 and 14 would be another option. We're not out of options yet. Natalie, what else? 7 and 8. So we have to decide which one of those pairs we want to use, where one of the numbers is positive and one of the numbers is negative. Anybody figure it out? May? Which one positive, which one negative? All right, negative 8 on top, positive 7 on bottom. When we connect our bubbles, what operation do we do? Multiply. 1 times negative 8. Negative 8. 3 times 7. 21. When we combine those, we get 13, which is what we were looking for. So we know we have the correct bubbles. Then we have to use that to write our answer. Not quite our answer, but to write the factored form. So I'll set up my parentheses. Not here. Ellie, what's going in the front of my parentheses? What goes with the 1 and the 3? I think you're getting ahead of me. What variable do I want with the 1 and the 3? Good. So the front pieces both get the variable x. And then Ellie started moving on to the next part. With the 1x, we are going to have to put the positive 7. And with the 3x, we're going to have to put the negative 8. So that the right things stay connected if we make our little smiley face. But what else belongs after these parentheses? Just a 0? Equals 0. All right, so now we have made sure it's in standard form and we have factored it. What was our next step after that? What did we do after we factored? Write out what? Deja?
X plus 7 is 0 and 3x plus 7 plus 8. I mean minus 8 is 0.
Good. So we write out two, what do we call these? What do we call these two things that we just wrote out? Equations. We wrote out two equations. So we could add that to our list of steps that we've got going on the board here. Maybe. So now that we've written our equations, we just have to solve them. Some people are already walking me through those steps. To solve this first one, how am I getting x alone? Subtract 7. So x equals -7. Who can help me solve the other one? Jamal? Add 8, and then what? Divide by 3, and then we just leave it alone. Leave it as x equals 8 over 3, or 8/3. We don't need to try to change that into a decimal or do anything with it. Leave it as a fraction. All right, this one looks a little bit different from the ones we looked at yesterday. But we'll take the same steps. Is it in standard form?
No. Well, yes, because it's still equals 0.
No, it's not.
Why is it not in standard form? Is there an x anywhere?
Yeah.
There's an x squared. There's no x. Does that mean we can't factor it? No. So this is in standard form. Just because there's not an x term at all doesn't mean that it can't be in standard form. We're not going to force there to be an x. There's no way for us to do that. That doesn't mean that it's not in standard form. It's still set equal to 0. The x squared is still first. The constant's still last. And we can still factor this. So let's move on to the factor step. If we go to factor this, is there a GCF? No. How many terms are there? 2. So what are we checking for? Get out those flowcharts if you're not sure.
What'd you say? What's that mean?
I asked what we're checking for if there's only 2 terms. Is it the difference of 2 perfect squares? Yes, it is. So we can factor this. It gets factored into 2 parentheses. What goes in the front of both? X. What goes in the back of both? A 6. And yes, as some people have said, we've got 1 plus and 1 minus. And this still gets set equal to 0. So we factored it. Jaquan? We will talk about using square roots in another lesson. That is another way of doing it. We just haven't talked about it yet. After we've factored, what are we ready to do? Nope. Write the equations. After our factor step, we write equations. What are my 2 equations? Good. Each factor gets set equal to 0. Now that I wrote my equations, what can I do? Solve them. How am I solving the first one? X equals -6. The other one? Add 6. X equals +6. Questions, concerns about this one? All right, let's move on to number 11. Give you a moment to write it down real quick. All right, first thing I have to ask about this problem. Is it in standard form? Our answer would be no, it's not. Why not? It doesn't equal 0.
Calm down.
How are we going to force this to be in standard form? Add the 40 to both sides. Is there anything for the 40 to combine with on the left? No. So it just gets added on to the end. And now it equals 0. Now that we're in standard form, what are we going to do? Factor it. So we need to write this as a multiplication problem. Is there a GCF? No, there is not. So what method are we going to have to use? Bubbles. So let's talk about our signs. What kind of signs am I going to have? 2 positives. The plus sign in the back tells me I need the same signs. The one in the middle says they're both going to be positive. What am I looking for? 23. Only option for my first bubble is 1 and 3. For my second bubble, I got a few options. What are they? 8 and 5 are the ones we want. 8 on top. Okay. It's easier when they're both positive. We don't have to worry about which one might be negative. 1 times 8 is 8. 3 times 5. Add them together. 23. So we know we've got the right bubbles. So then we go to actually write our factored answer. May, what's going in the front of my parentheses? Good. 1x and a 3x. Lexi, what's going in the backs? Very good. Plus 5 and plus 8. At the end of this, I still need it to be equal to 0. Once we're done factoring, we're ready to not ready to solve. Write equations. We're ready to write our equations. Jakeem, what's one equation I have to write? It's not an equation yet. For it to be an equation, it needs an equal sign. Thank you. Equals 0. And my other equation, Deja?
3x plus 8 equals 0.
Thank you. We've got to solve these. Tariana, how do I solve the first one? Good. What does x equal?
-5.
Thank you. And on my other one, Deshaun, what am I doing? Subtract 8 on both sides. And then what? Divide by 3. So we get x equals -8/3. Again, don't worry about trying to put that as a decimal. Just leave it alone. It's not going to come out nice anyway. Questions, concerns? Okay. All right, I'm going to leave the guided practice up here for you to copy those two down and work on those. I know there's not a ton of space down there at the bottom. And I will also write the other two up on the board or try to add them to that slide so you can get them all at the same time. I'll give you a few minutes to work on these on your own before we talk about our answers. All right, I'm going to kind of take away one of these at a time so that we can talk about them. This first one, we already mentioned a little bit that it's nice that they already factored it for us. So they got it in standard form, they factored it, so all we have to do is write and solve equations. Kelby, what are my two equations? Wonderful. We set each factor equal to 0 to write our equations. Nevaeh, how do I solve this first equation?
-3.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2x equals -3.
And then what do we do?
You have to divide it
By what?
2.
Very good. And then just leave it alone. -3/2. Don't have to go to a decimal. Not here. Jamal, how do I solve the other one? Add 4 to both sides. X equals. Good. X equals 4. And then we've got our two answers. Questions about the first one? Okay. Let's swap it out and look at number 2. Now, number 2 is not factored for us, so we're starting at the very beginning. We have to ask, is it in standard form? Yes, it is. We've got our decreasing exponents, squared, plane, constant, and it's set equal to 0. So we are ready to move on to the next step, which would be to factor. Now this one, when we talk about factoring, we should check for a GCF. Do we have one? No. So then we can start working our way through our flow chart. We should end up at the X method. So with our X method, what's going on top? And on bottom? What numbers do I need? 7 and 5 will multiply to 35 and add up to 12. So we use that to write our factored form. Nobody else is here. Jerio, how do I use that to write my factored form? We got x plus 7 and x plus 5 in our parentheses. It still needs to be set equal to 0. After we're done factoring, we are ready to, write equations. We're almost ready to solve. Ryan, what are my equations?
X plus 7 equals 0, and x plus 5 equals 0.
Wonderful. Jay Sean, how am I going to solve this first one?
Which one? X plus 5?
Nope, we wrote x plus 7 first. Subtract 7 and x equals -7. All right. Danielle, how would I solve the other one?
Subtract 5 from both sides.
Wonderful. All right, we got both of our answers. Questions about it?
Nah.
Concerns?
No concerns.
Ready for number 3? Okay. Let's take those away and just put number 3 up there. Number 3 from the top. Is it in standard form? No. What do I need to do to make it in standard form? Subtract 56 from both sides. Is there anything for the minus 56 to combine with? No. So I'm going to write it over here. We'd have x squared plus x minus 56 equals 0. Now that it's in standard form, we are ready to factor. What method would I use to factor this? The x method. What's going on top? Negative 56 on bottom. A 1, my numbers. Good. Negative 7, positive 8. So I want my 1 to end up positive. So I use that to write this in factored form. What is it in factored form? X minus 7, x plus 8 still is set equal to 0. After we factor, we have to write our equations. What are they? Good. Set each factor equal to 0. Last step is to solve. How do I solve? Add 7 and subtract 8. And then we're done. Questions, concerns? Okay. Let's do number 4. On number 4, is it in standard form? Yes, it is. So we are ready to factor. Is there a GCF? No, there is not. So what method are we looking at? Bubble method. What are my signs going to be? Good. One of each because our constant is negative. So we gotta have one of each. What are we looking for? Good. Looking for a positive 14. My only option for my first bubble. 1 and 3. Anybody figure out their second bubble? Negative 4 and 6. When we connect our bubbles, we are multiplying. 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. 3 times 6. When we combine those, wonderful. That's what we wanted. So we have to actually set this up in factored form. What's going in the fronts of my parentheses? 1x and 3x. And then I have to fill in the backs. Good. Plus 6 and minus 4. That is all still set equal to 0. We're finally done factoring. We're ready to write equations. We have to write our equations before we solve them. What are my equations? Wonderful. Now we're ready to solve. How do I solve the first one? Subtract 6. X equals negative 6. The other one? Add 4 and then divide by 3. Again, just leave it as 4/3. Don't worry about trying to change it.